I'm here with Amanda Burleigh, a wonderful midwife registered with the Royal College of Midwifery, who's been a person that's been standing for optimal cord clamping and campaigning for that, and also been able to change what the NICE guidelines are saying about optimal cord clamping. So she's going to tell us a bit more about this. We're here from Birth Forward, and we want to hear more about your work. And of course, you have also been joining our scientific advisory board to be able to advise us in great detail on this subject for what we present to the public in Cyprus. So welcome on the call. So please tell us a little bit more about your work.
Hi Elaine, thanks ever so much for inviting me. It's a real privilege. You're right, I've been working with cord clamping or delay cord clamping for about 11 years now. I was a midwife for 16 years before I realised that what we'd been trained to do had absolutely no evidence to support it, and that was immediate cord clamping. So what happened was the baby came out, we clamped and cut the cord, and then the baby started breathing. I realised after a light bulb moment in about the end of 2005, that actually what we were doing had no evidence to back it up, that we were actually interrupting a natural process. And the more I read up about it, the more I realised that actually we were doing something that didn't have evidence base. We weren't informing the parents, and there is growing evidence to show that interrupting the natural progress by doing immediate cord clamping can actually do harm. Certainly, the evidence at the time was there wasn't very much evidence at all. The piece of evidence that I found very compelling in 2005 was written by George Morley, who was an obstetrician in America, who felt very strongly that the interruption of the natural process, where the baby loses 30% of its blood volume, intended blood volume, he felt very strongly that that was it caused the rise in autism. And he'd written to the president of the US with a letter signed by the other doctors to say the same thing. He did experiments with monkeys where they did immediate cord clamping, and he showed that caused irreparable hypoxia and brain damage to the monkeys. And he felt that interrupting that process with the baby losing 30% of its blood volume, that this had a detrimental effect on babies. The reason it came in was about 50 or 60 years ago is because with the advent of the oxytocin drugs, which of course we knew they were devised and came into practice because there was an injection that was given to the mother that shortened the third stage of labour, which did decrease postpartum hemorrhage, which was a big killer of mums at that time. But at the time when they brought this in, they didn't actually think about the effects of interrupting the third stage and clamping and cutting the cord on the fetus. And there wasn't any evidence to support that, and there never has been any evidence to support that. We know now that the baby comes out, if the cord's left intact, usually within about 5 minutes, the cord has stopped pulsating, the baby's breathed, and the baby has a natural transition where the cord and the placenta and the baby all have a very nice relationship together. Whilst that baby comes out, adjusts to extrauterine life, the cord stops pulsating, the baby gets up to 214 grams of blood, which is intended to be in the baby, and that was Diane Farrer and her team in Bradford measured babies with the cord intact, and that showed that babies gain up to 214 grams, which of course in the UK is 7 ounces, which is a phenomenal amount for a baby to lose. It also shows that a baby comes through the vaginal canal or through the caesarean section and actually gets bigger when the baby's outside. The other research that's come into play after that has shown that babies that have immediate cord clamping have got much more chance of having iron deficiency anemia. Judith Mercer and Ulla Andersson from Sweden have shown this. And then Ulla Andersson's follow-up studies at 4 years old show that males are more likely to have decreased fine motor and social skills because of the iron deficiency anemia. There are larger studies going on, but I think that the impact of iron deficiency anemia, which is proved by immediate cord clamping, impacts on the child's mental health and learning abilities, and that really it's not a case of moving from immediate cord clamping to delay cord clamping and thinking about the obstacles. It's about stopping immediate cord clamping and implementing delay cord clamping or optimal cord clamping, because there isn't any evidence to support what we're doing now. The UK is actually really on board now. In many places, obviously we've got a long way to go because it's very difficult to get people to change practice. But we have hospitals now that are doing delayed or optimal cord clamping. I'll explain the difference to that in a minute. In all deliveries, including caesarean sections and forceps deliveries. The guidelines did change. When I first found out about this in 2005, all the guidelines recommended immediate cord clamping, including the World Health Organization, who changed their guidance in 2007 to recommend delayed cord clamping, particularly in areas of anemia, endemic anemia, because of the impact of iron deficiency anemia on the baby as well. In the UK, the Royal College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists changed their guidelines in 2009 to recommend delayed cord clamping for at least a minute. 2012, the Royal College of Midwives, because a lot of babies the majority of babies are delivered in the UK by midwives, recommended delayed cord clamping, and if a labour is completely natural, that midwives should be competent in the physiological third stage and active management of the third stage, which was quite useful really, because I think the management of the third stage is becoming so important now that if somebody is low risk, we should be looking where possible to try and minimise any interruption in that third stage, so that the transition between mother and baby is there's no problems, that it can be as natural as possible before that relationship between the mother and the baby is separated. I think that there is more and more research now. I know certainly when I first started looking, there wasn't a lot of research, but doing a search the other week, there's lots and lots more research coming out, which of course it's a bit more difficult to find the quality research, but I am in partnership with a lot of the really good researchers, Judith Mercer, Ulla Anderson, David Hutchin, and I think that the quality of the evidence that's coming out and the increased evidence to show that what we've done for the past 50 and 60 years has been detrimental to our children, and I think that this evidence will grow. Judith Mercer was a midwife, or is a midwife, in the US, and she realised very early on in her career, in about the 2000s, that immediate cord clamping was detrimental, but realised that she was in quite a male medical model in America, that she wasn't going to change things unless she became academic. And she's done a lot of studies on delayed cord clamping, particularly in premature babies. The thing with premature babies is that the babies, uncompromised babies, are more likely to get immediate cord clamping because of the need for resuscitation. But the research shows that these are the babies that benefit more. Mm-hmm. The babies that get delayed cord clamping that are premature have less intraventricular hemorrhage, less necrotizing enterocolitis, less blood transfusions, less anemia, and they do better overall following a premature delivery. And the same goes with compromised babies. Obviously, you have to weigh up the pros and cons about whether a baby needs resuscitating or whether it needs its cord blood. At the moment, resuscitation always must come first. But what my journey is that I recognised in 2005 that we were doing something that wasn't evidence-based. And at that time, everybody laughed and said, "You're ridiculous, it doesn't make any difference. We've done it for 50 years, But then you look at the accumulative effect of child health and the problems that children are having, and the increase in diabetes, and the increase of increase in diabetes, the increase in autism and autistic spectrum disorders, learning behaviour problems. Some things, at first, ethically, we have to do no harm. The other thing that I would say about immediate cord clamping is it is an intervention. We're not informing the parents what we're doing, which is basically what we're doing is depriving the baby of 30% of their intended blood volume without knowing the results of that or what that will cause. And I know in the UK that we're very into informed choice, and we should be telling parents if we do immediate cord clamping. We shouldn't be telling them that we're doing delayed cord clamping, because delayed cord clamping is not the intervention. But immediate cord clamping is the intervention. And we do have one hospital in England who have done immediate delayed cord clamping since 2009, who have refused to do a policy for immediate cord clamping or delayed cord clamping, because they said that they should only have a policy for immediate cord clamping, because immediate cord clamping is the intervention. Certainly, as I was saying before about resuscitation, even the European Resuscitation Council have brought out guidance, and they say wherever possible, the baby should have delayed cord clamping for at least a minute. NICE guidelines recommend delayed cord clamping for at least a minute, unless the heart rate is 60 beats per minute and not getting faster, which of course is absolute minority of babies. Very few babies will have a heart rate of less than 60 beats per minute. So what we did, we realised that one of the biggest obstacles about babies getting delayed cord clamping was going to be the need for resuscitation. So a consultant called David Hutchon, who's done loads of research, got in touch with us in 2010 and called a meeting of 7 other consultants and me, the only midwife, and along with Andrew Weeks and a team from Liverpool and Nottingham and Leeds, and we devised a basics trolley, which has now been manufactured as a lifestyle trolley, which is a small resuscitator that can be brought up to the mum with a caesarean section or a premature baby, and the baby can be left intact with the cord intact, so that resuscitation and an intact cord can work together at the same time. Quite a lot of hospitals have taken that on board. We've got a long way to go because, again, there's a lot of fear in change of practice. Changes in practice is people don't like to change practice. It's something that they've always done, and changing the practice, people look for obstacles. So one of the reasons that people say that we shouldn't do delayed cord clamping is because of raised levels of jaundice. Cochrane actually got together and looked at, I think it was 8 studies, and showed that there isn't actually an increase in jaundice. And any perceived increase in jaundice would be physiological jaundice. It's completely normal. We have to think that the jaundice levels that we've been measuring before have been on hypovolemic babies who have lost a third of their blood volume. So any perceived increase, and although the research said there isn't, anecdotally people do say that babies can have a little bit more jaundice. Paediatricians will say that the babies are more jaundice or polycythemic, but the research doesn't add this up. And even so, even if there is a perceived level of jaundice, we have to learn how to work with this, because we can't be doing immediate cord clamping and risking iron deficiency anemia to prevent a little bit of jaundice in some babies. We have to be better at monitoring the babies, and we have to have the facilities for phototherapy if they think it's necessary. It's not a valid excuse for immediate cord clamping. Another reason people will think that we need immediate cord clamping is because of cord bloods. For doctors, they like to do PHs, midwives like to do Clyhauer if the mother's rhesus negative, and that is not good enough excuse either, because it's perfectly possible to do a blood gas on a cord that's still pulsating using a fine bore needle and gentle pressure, just as you would do with a mother taking a venous sample. You put gentle pressure on afterwards. Some people say, well, the cord will go into spasm. It doesn't go into spasm. It's gentle pressure onto the puncture site, and you can continue to do that whilst the baby's being resuscitated. Saying that, most of the blood volume is transferred over by 2.5 minutes. So when Diane Farrow did her study, you can see they've got a table it's a really good visual, and it shows that when the baby's put on, their sample was the baby weighed 3,400 kilograms, 400 grams, and after 5 minutes the baby weighed 3,600. Yeah. Most of the 200 grams was over by about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So trying to give the baby a minute with resuscitation. You can do 30 seconds for assessing, which is what the guidelines recommend. Assessing the baby, rubbing the baby, practice 5 practice rescue breaths. It's perfectly possible for any baby to have at least 30 to 45 seconds, even without not having a basics trolley. So it's about looking at the evidence, and most people, when they hear the evidence or read the evidence, and I suggest that anybody that's interested in it who thinks, gosh, this is really interesting, I haven't thought about it, because a lot of people haven't, should read studies by Judith Mercer, Ulla Anderson, and look at the piece of work by Diane Farrow. Because Judith Mercer particularly does a fantastic paper called Rethinking Placental Transfusion. They did that in 2012, and it covers every aspect. The other problem with delayed cord clamping is that the cord blood bank bloods, the cord blood banks, there's people who want to get their hands on the umbilical cord blood because it's very valuable stuff and they want to do stem cell research. Any baby should be having at least 2 minutes. There are companies that do that. We've got 3 companies in the UK who are very ethical, and they will do delayed cord clamping, and they will do it for 2 minutes, and they say that it's not a problem. You can still get as much blood for the cord blood. Also, with the increases in the developments in pathology, it's much easier now to replicate the blood cells, so you don't need as big of amounts. I know that in the Middle East, they're still doing cord blood, and in India, and they're taking as much blood as they can off a baby. And one company actually told me that they got 260 mils off one baby. 260 mils off a baby is that's a phenomenal amount. In the UK, certainly, children are not allowed to give blood at all. Adults can only give an eighth of their blood, but we think it's acceptable for a baby to give away 30% of the blood volume. This isn't rocket science. This is I do feel that it's having an impact on the evolution of the human race. I think what we're seeing years down the line is a build-up of this, because we're on the second generation. We're clamping and cutting the cords of babies whose parents had their cords clamped and cut. You know, what are we doing? What have we been doing whilst we've been interfering? The other thing you wanted to ask me about was delayed cord clamping and optimal cord clamping. Delayed cord clamping is a delay in clamping the cord. Some people would argue that we shouldn't be calling it delayed cord clamping because it should be called premature clamping of the cord. But at the time, if you'd have said to anybody, delayed cord clamping, if you'd have said to somebody, we want optimal cord clamping, in Cyprus you said that it's quite routine practice to do immediate cord clamping. So if you said to somebody, do optimal cord clamping, at that moment in time, they might think that immediate cord clamping was optimal cord clamping. In the UK, we said delayed cord clamping initially, because delayed is a move on. It's meaning that the practitioner should delay clamping that cord. So it makes them think about the practice. So even if that baby gets a minute, it's certainly getting a minute better than it was. Optimal cord clamping is a step away from delayed cord clamping. And optimal cord clamping is when the cord has finished its job and it's moved from being a cord that's full of blood to a cord that's white and empty. Because that's when it's finished its job, and that is the optimal time to clamp and cut the cord. When the baby's out crying and the cord has finished its function.
So that's often referred to wait for white, I've heard.
This is wait for white. Yes, it is. It's a campaign because it's very visual. It explains it perfectly, and if we can get that going globally, it would be fantastic. And it's really taken off in the UK, where people say, don't clamp the cord, wait for white, because the cord will be full of blood, and then when it's finished its job, it's white. And theoretically, you could cut through the cord and not need clamps at all. I don't recommend that, but you could, because the Walton's jelly shuts down the cord when it's finished its process. And I'm sure in years gone by, that's exactly what happened, and what happens with puppies and cats, that the cord just stops pulsating and then it can be chewed through.
Exactly, yeah. Fantastic. So if you're going to give, what do you think is this biggest challenge really for, you mentioned that, changing procedures is hard. Well, could you say something about what would your advice be for obstetricians, for midwives, particularly in a country like Cyprus where there's very high C-section rates and also a lot of intervention at birth? What would be your recommendation in terms of making this happen and becoming aware?
I think small steps, really. I think small steps with the... I think delayed cord clamping needs to be done, without a shadow of doubt. Practice needs to evolve so that delayed cord clamping becomes routine practice. Because I think that we're not giving the parents informed choice. If they knew that we were depriving their babies 30% of their blood volume, particularly with the research showing that it can cause iron deficiency anemia, which impacts on their child learning and behaviour, we're walking on very thin ice completely. I think in a country that is very medical, I think there's a lot of questions around timing of giving the oxytocin drug. And I get asked lots and lots of questions about that. What is the best time to give the oxytocin drug? NICE guidelines in the UK said that you can give the oxytocin drug immediately. I didn't actually change the NICE guidelines. I actually nagged them so much that they eventually, they did change them, but I'm sure they would have done anyway. I did get a petition that was signed by 44 different countries, and Cyprus was one of them. And I think NICE say you can give the oxytocin drug immediately and then clamp and cut the cord between 1 and 5 minutes. Those guidelines are based on an awful lot of evidence. And I think that if Cyprus wanted to move ahead, they would do well to adopt the NICE guidelines. I actually think that they could go a lot further. I think that if somebody's having a normal delivery and there is no risk factors, that the oxytocin drug can be left either not used at all in the physiological third stage, or if there's no resus of the baby needed and there's no bleeding, there's no rush to give the oxytocin. And the oxytocin can be given after a few minutes. There is a small amount that goes through to the baby. It usually takes from oxytocin drug from injection to the baby, it's about 2 to 3 minutes. The NICE guidance say that doesn't matter. Interestingly enough, New Zealand say that they will not give oxytocin before the baby's born. Before the cord is clamped, because we haven't got the evidence to say that that little bit that goes over doesn't cause harm. And again, are we making assumptions there that the oxytocin going over to the baby doesn't make no harm? And are we falling into the same thing that we're doing something because we believe it's okay, which we thought immediate cord clamping is okay, or is it based on firm evidence? I think with Cyprus, they are very medically orientated, and I think adopting the NICE guidelines, which is immediate oxytocin and then delaying cord clamping from 1 to 5 minutes, would be satisfactory. I still think that, personally, I think waiting a minute to give the oxytocin and then waiting at least 3 minutes to clamp and cut the cord would be better. Certainly in caesarean sections, there's been a lot of resistance in some hospitals, but some doctors have been absolutely fantastic. And Leeds, certainly where I worked, were very, very resistant to this. They've spent a year saying, no, we're not going to do delayed cord clamping. And every baby now that is delivered by caesarean section will have delayed cord clamping. The baby's delivered, lays on the mum's legs, until the cords stop pulsating in a lot of the cases. Obviously, the anaesthetist gives the oxytocin, the syntocinon. The cord shuts down quite quickly. Baby resuscitates or pinks itself up quite nicely, and they only have to do this once to see that a baby doesn't need us to fly in and rescue it. That the cord, which has been, of course, it's providing oxygen all the way through the pregnancy, and it is actually that baby's body, that we can just hold fire and let that body finish its job and then clamp and cut the cord when the baby's transited on its own. And that gives the baby a much gentler transition into extrauterine life. The baby also has better perfusion of all its organs, it's higher oxygen levels. It's natural. It's what is intended.
Fantastic, yeah. It's so good to hear you speak about this. As you know, our first campaign that we are working on in Cyprus is actually to bring awareness about the optimal cord clamping. And so we've made an infographic that people can find on our websites, and the information is there from you as well. There's an article from you on our website, www.birthforward.com. And this infographic is being published and given out in different different areas, so that people can get to see it and use it and find the references. It's referenced to the publications that Amanda has been speaking about today as well, so we can see that it's following up from the conversation today and from the article on our website.